Hi everyone, welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and today we're going to talk about mezuzah. The Gemara in Menachot gives us some information about mezuzah, and I want to think with you about what is mezuzah for? Is it really something that protects our homes in a manner of, I don't know, getting an alarm protects our home, right? I want to actually think about that with you from both a rationalist and a mystical perspective. So let's jump in. First things first, the Gemara in Menachot on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet tells us, Amar Rava, mitzvah al-hanicha b'tevach hasamuch l'reshut harabim. It is appropriate to place the mezuzah in a handbreadth that is closer to the public thoroughfare, meaning not towards the inside, but towards the outside. My taima, why? Rabbanan Amri, the rabbis say, Kidei she'yifka b'mezuzah miyad, so that a person, when they walk into the house, will first encounter the mezuzah immediately. Whereas Rabbi Chanina Misura says, Ki hechi titintere, so that the mezuzah will protect the whole house. So put it further outside, further towards the outside, so that it protects more. And continuing to dilate on this concept of mezuzah as protection, Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Bo u're'eh shelo ki midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu, midat basar v'dam. God's character is different than human character or way of doing things. Midat basar v'dam, melech yoshev mibifnim, v'am mishamrim oto mibachutz. A human monarch would sit inside, and their nation would protect the monarch from outside. But midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu eino kain. God doesn't work that way. Avadav yoshvim mibifnim, v'hu mishamram mibachutz. God's servants, that's us, we sit inside, and God protects us from outside, meaning the mezuzah, through the mezuzah. Shneamar, as it says, Hashem shomrecha, Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Right? God is your keeper. God is the shade on your right hand. Okay? So clearly this concept of mezuzah as protective, or mezuzah as indicating divine protection or offering divine protection, is something that is strong in the Gemara. I have to say that actually this statement of Rabbi Chanina appears differently, or not appears differently, it appears in a different context in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, similarly focused on God saving the people, or caring about the people. But I think that in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, I might think of it as maybe more symbolic than literal, because the story is Onkelos bar Kalonimus Igayer, Onkelos converted to Judaism. Shadar Caesar Gunda de Romai Abatrai, and the Caesar sent a troop of soldiers after him to seize him. Mashchinu Bikrai, and basically he won them over through psukim. He won them over through scriptural verses, and Igayer, and that whole troop, they converted as well. Hadar Shadar Gunda de Romai Acharina Abatrai. The king then sent another troop after him. Amarlu, and he said to them, Lo temru le'velo midi, but don't talk to him, right? He didn't want his troops all getting proselytized. But kihabu shakli ve'azli, when they were actually walking, meaning they had uncles and they were walking, Amarlahu, he said to them, Eimalahu milkta ba'alma, let me just tell you something, a little something. Nifiora nakit nura kame apifiora, a minor official holds a torch before a higher official. Apifiora ledukasa, that official holds it before the one who is senior to them. Dukasa lehegemona, and that official, maybe we'd call them the duke, holds a torch in front of the one who's higher than they are. Hegemona lekoma, and the hegemon to whoever's higher than them. But koma minaket nuri mekame inche. Would you have the koma, who seems to be the highest level of officer there, hold a torch in front of anyone else? Amrle lo, Amrle lo. They said, of course not, meaning he's the highest ranking. Everybody holds torches before him. He doesn't hold a torch before anyone else. Amrlahu, and he said to them, Akadosh Baruch Hu, Nakat Nurakam Israel. Well, God, who is the sovereign of sovereigns, who is the highest of status, chose to carry a torch before the Jewish people. Tichtiv, as it is written, Hashem holech lifnehem yomam v'gomer. Right? God walks before us in the wilderness during the day in an amud anan, the pillar of cloud, and at night with an amud esh, with a torch, is the way it's being understood. So of course they heard this concept that God cares about the people so much that God would hold a torch before them, whereas in the Roman ecosystem, If you're the highest, you seem not to, condescend to help anybody else. Igayar Kulu, they all converted to Judaism. And then comes the mezuzah. Hadar Shadar Gunda Acharina Abatare. The king tried again and sent a third set of troops. Amahu lo tishta omid, please don't talk to him. Kinakti leva azli, when they were taking him out of his house, Chaza mezuzah demancha pitcha, he saw the mezuzah on his entryway. Otiv yadeh Allah, he put his hand on it. Va'amalu, and he said, my hi, what is this? Do you know what this mezuzah is? Amalahu, emat at. They said, what do you mean? Tell us. Amrlahu says, Minhago shel olam, the way the world works is usually melech basar v'dam yoshev mibifnim. The monarch, the human monarch, sits inside, v'abadam mishamrim oto mibachutz, and the servants are outside guarding the monarch. Ve'ilu hakadosh baruch hu, but when it comes to God, avadav mibifnim, v'hu mishamar mibachutz, right? Just what we saw Rabbi Chanina saying in our Gemara in Menachot. The servants are inside, meaning Bnei Israel are inside, and God protects them from outside. Shinemar, as it says, Hashem yishmor tzeicha v'oecha me'atav yad, right? God will protect your goings and comings, right, at the door, from now and forever. And then, of course, Igayer, they all converted, and Tulo Shadar Batre, the Caesar stopped sending people to try to seize Onkelos. I think what's interesting here is to consider how literally is this supposed to be taken? Meaning clearly based on the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, example or metaphor, what he's trying to show is God, part of God's leadership of the world is that God actually cares about us, right? And that's different than Roman leadership. And the question is really, are we supposed to be looking at a mezuzah as that's literally God protecting the doorway, or is there something else? And I say that especially because I have in my mind the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah that talks about Moshe raising his hands during the war with Amalek, right? Vayak asher yarim Moshe yado v'gavar Yisrael. When Moshe would put up his hands, the Jews would be winning, and then when he put down his hands, they'd be losing. And the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah in Perek Gimel in chapter 3 asks, V'chi yadav shel Moshe osot milchama o shavot milchama. What? Moshe's hands make or break war with Amalek? Elo lomar lecha, it's coming to teach you shekol zman shayu Yisrael mistaklim klape malan. As long as the Jewish people were looking heavenward, meaning his hands are up, he's pointing for them to look heavenward, umishabdim et libam la'avim shebashamayim, and they essentially committed themselves to God. Hayu mitgabrim, they were winning. V'im lav hayu noflin, and if not, they were losing, right? Kayotse b'davar, similarly, Ataomer, you see in the situation in the Midbar, in the wilderness, when Moshe was told to put up a nachash nechoshet, right? A copper serpent for people to look at. If they got bit by a serpent, they would look at it and they'd be fine. So similarly, we wanted people to look heavenward. So this is interesting because the Mishnah is trying to deal with the question of what you think Moshe's arms are a talisman that's going to win or lose war. You think some copper icon, which by the way ultimately becomes like a symbol of medicine, right? That copper snake with a staff in the middle, right? You think that copper snake icon saved people from snake bites? No, the idea was that this was supposed to be having them look heavenward, and that is actually what protected them. So this is interesting because when you say things like, are Moshe's arms a talisman? I might say it's true. Moshe's arms are not a talisman, and the Nachash HaNechoshet, the copper snake, is not a talisman. But maybe the mezuzah, because it's actually, what does it have in it? It has Shema and Vahaya im Shema, because it has Torah, the source of Kedusha, because it has revelation in it. Maybe it actually is protective in that way. And it's not just, oh, it reminds you of God and therefore you're protected. So I want to look at that a little bit. So look at Dvarim, Perek Yud Aleph, right? Deuteronomy 11. You're supposed to inscribe the Torah in the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Why? L'man yirbui mechem, so that you will live a long life. V'mei v'nechem, And so will your children, where Allah on the land that God has promised to your ancestors to give. Right? So long as there is heaven and earth, meaning it sounds like, similar to, you do kibbud avim and you get a long life. You do mezuzah and you get a long life. Now, is that necessarily so true? Maybe what we're talking about is the whole thing, right? Meaning it's the whole thing of you're gonna talk about Torah on your way, and you're gonna put Torah on your arms for and on your head for tefillin, and you're gonna write it on your meaning. Maybe what it's saying is you're gonna be surrounded by Torah, and if you're surrounded by Torah and your fealty to God is real, then God will protect you, right? In some long run version. The Yerushalmi in Peah, I would say, does kind of indicate some, it's like, protective qualities to a mezuzah. And I'd imagine that people who are more of the mystical tradition would look at these and say, yeah, a mezuzah actually, it has God's name, right? It has Torah, which is the source of divine revelation in the world. It actually is it's God's protective device, so to speak. So in the Yerushalmi in Peah, we have an interesting story. The Parthian king Artaban, Shalach le Rabbeinu Hakadosh, he sent something to Rabbeinu Hakadosh, which, by the way, interestingly enough, in the Yerushalmi, sometimes Rabbeinu Hakadosh is not Rabbi Yehuda the Prince; it's actually Rav. So Artaban sent to Rav Chad Margale Tava Ati Meton. He sent a priceless, precious pearl. Right, that word priceless apparently is a Greek loanword. Amarle, and he says, Shlach li mila de tava kavata. And the king said, send me something that's as good as what I sent you. Shalach lechad mezuzah. So he sent him a mezuzah. Amarle, ma ana shlachet lach mila de leit leitime. I sent you something priceless. Va'at shalach li mila de tava chad polar. You told me, you sent me something that's worth a phallus, a copper coin, meaning this mezuzah, it's cheap. What are you talking about? Amarle, no, no, no. He says, chavatzecha v'chavatzai lo yishmuva. First of all of your possessions and all of my possessions are not equal to what I sent you. Blood, and moreover, you send me something that I have to protect, right? This precious pearl, I have to keep it in a safe place that it doesn't get stolen, etc. And I sent you something that you could go to sleep and it will protect you. Dichtiv, as it says, right? We say this for a seal, right? When you are walking, it will lead you, right? And then the rest of the pasuk, right? B'shach b'cha tishmor alecha. When you're sleeping, right, it will guard over you. And then when you wake up, it will be what you speak about. But the point is, you could be asleep and that mezuzah is going to protect you, right? Meaning it does make it sound like it is actually protective. And in fact, the Kolbo, an anonymous halachic collection from the 13th to 14th century, tells us, well, let's talk about the minhag pashut shekotvin al mezuzah mibachutz keneged harevach shebin parsha leparsha shadai, right? There is a minhag that on the outside of the parchment, right? Once you've written Shema and Vayayim Shemoah on one side, and there is a space in between those two paragraphs. On the outside of the parchment, corresponding to that space, you write Hashem's name, Shin, Dalet, and Yud. Ve'ein bazeh hefsed, and this doesn't invalidate the scroll, lefi shehu mi bachutz, because it's on the outside, meaning you write Shema and Vayayim Shema on the inside, and then you write Hashem's name on the outside of the parchment, meaning the other side of the parchment. V'tam lama kotvin zeh Hashem yoter min ha'achirim. Why do we write this name rather than other names of God? Lefi shehu notrikon, because it is shorthand for Shomer Dirat Yisrael. God is the protector of the Jewish home. Now, by the way, some people say it's Shomer Tzlatot Yisrael. God is the protector of Jewish doorways or doors. And the idea is, no, we're talking about real protection. Now, somebody who was really against this idea of looking at the mezuzah as something that's kind of a protective, you might say, amulet of sorts, was, of course, the Rambam, Maimonides, arch rationalist. He is not going to have you using your mezuzah as something that you think is protective. Minhag pashut, he says, shekotvim al mezuzah mibachutz kineged harevach shemin parsha leparsha shaddai. Right? He says the same thing as we just saw in the kolbo, but he said it earlier because Rambam was earlier. There's a minhag that you're going to write Hashem's name, Shud, Shin, Dalet, and Yud, corresponding to where the space is between Shema V'Hayim Shema on the parchment, but on the back of the parchment. Ve'in b'zeh have said it's not a problem if you shoot b'chutz because it's on the outside. Aval, however, elu shekotvin mebifnim shemot hamalachim, people who write on the inside of the cloth names of angels, o shemot kiddushim, or names of or holy names, o pasuk, o chotamot, or a verse, or some sort of like seal on it, right? Ooh, I just lost my place. I don't know why. Sorry. O chotamot, right? Says, okay, here. Harein bichlal mi she'en lahem chelek l'olam haba. They have no share in the world to come. Ooh, whoa. Whoa, whoa. She'elu hatipshim, because these foolish people, lo dai lahem, shebitlu hamitzvah. It's not just that they have nullified the mitzvah because they write it on the side of the cloth that's supposed to only have Shema and Vayayim Shema. Ella she'asu mitzvah gedolah, but moreover, they took a great mitzvah, shehi yichud Hashem shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is recognizing the oneness of God. V'avato, v'avodato, and love of God, and service of God. Ki'ilu hu kameya, as though it's an amulet. Shel hanayat atzman, for their own benefit. Kimo she'ala al libam hasachal, that their foolish hearts thought of. Shezeu davar hamehaneh b'avlei olam, that ki'ilu, the mezuzah, is going to help you with things that are, you know, just the nothingness of this world. Now, by the way, this is kind of a reference. If you look at the Rambam elsewhere, he actually talks about the problem of people using like a Sefer Torah for healing services, right? So I'm looking at like Hilchot Avodat Kochavim. I just put it in the English, where he says a person who whispers an incantation over a wound and recites a verse from the Torah, recites a verse over a child so that they won't become scared, or places a Torah scroll or tefillin over a baby so that it will sleep, is considered a soothsayer or one who casts spells. Furthermore, such people are included among those who deny the Torah because they relate the words of the Torah as though they are cures of the body, when in fact they are cures for the soul, right? Meaning the Rambam says, absolutely not. You should not be looking at the mezuzah as an amulet. It is not something that's supposed to bring you prosperity. It's not something that it's like a magical talisman. That's not the way it works. So what is it? So says the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, the next parak in the halachot of tefillin and mezuzah, which come together, says chayav adam lizaher b'mezuzah. Person should be very careful about mezuzah. Mipnei shehi chovat hakol tamid, because it is a constant requirement for everyone. But kol zman sheyikanes v'yitzeh, and anytime a person comes in or goes out, yifga, same word from our Gemara, they will confront b'yichud Hashem shemo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God's oneness, v'yizkor avato, and a person will remember to love God, v'ye'or mishnato v'shigyotav b'havlei hazman, and a person will awaken from their mistakes, or from their slumber and from their mistakes by getting involved in the nothingness of this world, right? And what he means by that is like vanity, right? V'yeda she'ein davar ha'omed le'olam al'olei olamim ela yidiat tzur ha'olam. And a person will know that there is nothing that lasts forever other than knowing God. Umiyad hu chozer l'dato v'olech b'derchei misharim. And that will help a person essentially do better, right? Walk in straight ways. Amru chachamim harishonim, the early rabbi said, Kol mi sheyesh lo tefillin b'rosho, uvizro'o, v'tzitzit b'vigdo, umezuzah b'pitcho. Anyone who has tefillin on their head and their arm, has tzitzit on their clothing, meaning the fringes on their clothing, and a mezuzah in their doorway, muchzak hu shelo yechata. It is presumed that that person is not going to sin. Sharei li yesh lo mazkirin rabim, because you have many reminders. Behein heim hamalachim shematzilin oto milachata. Those are the messengers, not the angels. Those are the angels. Those are the messengers that keep you from sinning. Shneimar, as it says, Chonem malach Hashem saviv lirav vayechaltzem, right? God's messenger camps around those who have awe of God and basically strengthens them or protects them, right? So the Rambam says, what's the protection that you're looking for from a mezuzah? The protection is to remind you not to sin, to remind you to be good. Every time you walk into a place with a mezuzah, you are reminded, oh, God is watching, God exists, reality is reality, vanity is vanity, and I'm going to be protected from sin, right? It's a beautiful kind of protection, definitely the rationalist's perspective on protection. Now, there is something that kind of comes in between these two, right? Like one kind of looking at the mezuzah as something that is protective in and of itself. You could be the Parthian king, you could be pagan, it doesn't matter. It's a protective, it's protective for you. And seeing the mezuzah as something that protects you from sin because it is something that is a reminder for you. You have a cognitive experience when you see it and you internalize that cognitive experience. There is something somewhat in between. And I saw actually Rav Baruch Gigi, who's one of the co-Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshivat Har Etzion at Gush, and I was fortunate enough to have him as a teacher. I think it was Hilchot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbos, when I was back in Migdal Oz many years ago. And he had a really interesting perspective that I think kind of joins these two together, right? He's definitely against the looking at the mezuzah as something that is purely protective on its own, irrespective of what people do. But he does seem to join together the idea that a mezuzah will give you protection, not just from sin, but will actually ultimately give you protection. But that's only because you decide to make your home a Beit Hashem. You decide to make your home a home, a godly home, or like a Beit HaMikdash. So what he does is he actually takes from Shmot, where we have to put blood on the doorposts on the night of the Exodus, right? Vaya adam lachem, this is Shmot Yud Bet, Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vaya adam lachem laot ala batim asher atasham, right? The blood is going to be a sign on the homes where you are. God says, and I'm going to see the blood, and I will either pass over or protect you. And you will not be destroyed by any plague when I am smiting the Egyptians, right? It's the night of the firstborn, death of the firstborn. You won't have any of those deaths. And the Beit Yosef, right, Rav Yosef Karo, author of the Shulchan Aruch, who actually himself was a mystic. He wrote a book called the Magid Mesharim, which records his visitations from a heavenly mentor or Magid while he was sleeping. It's a mystical diary. And he says, Umay dekasha b'pasuk v're'iti adam ufasachti alachem. He says, well, we might have a question about the pasuk, and I will see the blood, and I will either pass over you or protect you. Amay itzrich simana. Why do you even need a sign? Kol kalui lefanav, everything is known before God. You could actually say, Da'ata v'simana itzrich, that you need an oat and a siman, you need some sort of sign. Mishum malachaya da'atu, maybe because of the angels that are coming with God, and they need to know. The two ikalamimar, and moreover, you can say, or another option you could say is di'ikalak shuye. You could ask, Dahu simana have bedama. But wait a second, why is it blood? Bahave ot mavet, that's actually a symbol of death. That is the opposite of what is desired, right? We don't want death to come to that house. And also there is, if this was really a sign for others outside, like, God's angelic hosts, then it should be outside the blood. V'hai have a mister demigaf. They were actually supposed to put this symbol towards the inside of their doors. By the way, opposite of mezuzah, but towards the inside of their doors. So he says, Aval Raza de Milta, where you see he's really a Kabbalist talking about angels, and right? Although Rosa de Milta, here's the secret of the whole thing. God wanted to hear Chatzumbe, that the Jewish people would believe in God, right? You know, we say Be Anarachitz, right? Believe in God. That's what we say when we take out the Torah. Yirchatzun, same word. V'yishvu nahu dam apitcha milagav, and they should be putting the blood on the doorpost, but like towards the inside, meaning for themselves. V'hainu dichtiv, and that's what it means. Vaya adam lachen leot, it should be a sign for you. Umakom dehavelu leminchal mechazehon dama al pitcha, right? That in a time when they were actually, they should be scared by seeing blood. Adarabba, yirchatzun b'marehon tipakid lemevar hachi lemehavilu shizvata. Right? They say, no, in that moment where they see blood, they're not afraid of blood. They're not afraid that they're going to die. They trust in God. And the fact, the merit of them believing in God will actually protect them. And that's what it means. This is going to be a sign for you, right? And I will see the blood, and I will either protect you or pass over you. Klomar, meaning, I'm going to see the zechut, the merit of your belief, right? The dama, that blood, the hava simana de mavta, which is usually a symbol of death, yehe lachon simana de chaye, has become a symbol of life for you. Berechitu de memra de marichon, because you believe in what your master, what God has said. We'll begin kach, and because of that, right? I will see the blood and I will either pass over you or I will protect you. Meaning the idea here is that the blood is actually a sign for them, showing themselves that they actually believe, and they look at the blood and they're not scared, right? And that is what gives them the zechut, gives them the merit to be protected. And Rav Baruch he basically says this in his own words. Nearly, it seems to me, sheyesh levaresh b'derech domeh et nitinat mezuzah b'derech petach habayit. I think you should read the mezuzah in a similar way. Mashma'ut hatzavat mezuzah hi afichat beito shel adam lebeit Hashem. Right? Actually, putting a mezuzah on one's home is turning one's home into the home of God. Now, one thing that he adds, if you want to look up the original article, one thing he adds is he thinks, look, there's no Mishkan, there's no Beit HaMikdash. So actually putting the blood on your doorpost is the same way you would put the blood of a korban on an altar. So what you're doing is you're turning in your home into a Beit Hashem. You're turning your home into a godly place, meaning you look at it as like a mikdash. The point is you have responsibilities to God there. Adam mafnim umevin, a person internalizes and understands Hashem hu adon kol haaretz, that God is the sovereign of all the world, v'hu yechido shel olam, and God is the one of the world. Ulefichach mevakesh ulechyot lefanav, and a person in doing that is basically saying, God, I want to live before you. Chachamim kavu, the rabbis establish shemezuzah chovat hadar, that the mezuzah is the responsibility of the one who lives there. לפיכך המזוזה שהוא קובע בפתח ביתו, מגדירה את הדר בבית כמי שדר בבית השם ולפניו. Then putting the mezuzah, what you're doing is you're defining yourself as somebody who lives in God's home and lives before God. מתוך כך, and from that, כאמור, as it said, as was already said, בוקע ועולה רעיון שמירת הבית. By definition, right? By definition, then protection comes to the house. Shehu Beit Hashem, it is a house of God. Kedavar hamuvan melav, it's understood on its own. And therefore he says, Hamezuzah eina hashomer, the mezuzah is not the protector. Elahi hakli hayotzer tazika. It is the vessel for creating a connection between God and human being. Hashem hu hashomer, God is the protector. And a person who stands before God and accepts the yoke of God's sovereignty over themselves is fortunate enough to stand next to the sovereign. Hashem shomer umilava adam zeh b'chol asher yifneh. Right? God will protect and accompany such a person in any direction that they turn. Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. God will be the shade on your right hand, and God will also protect your comings and goings. So this is very interesting because whereas the Rambam does not seem to offer protection from anything but sin. What Rav Giki is suggesting is what we're looking at is you're putting a mezuzah on the house is your way of saying, I'm trying to live before God. And in the zechut, in the merit of that, God will be with you in this, that, in everything that you do. Now, we have to be very careful about, obviously, we have the whole issue of theodicy, of tzaddik viralo, tzaddika virala, meaning, bad things happen to good people. So I'm a little more comfortable with the Rambam, but he's basically trying to say it is at least a bakasha, it's at least a request from God and saying, I'm trying to live before you, please be with me. Right. So I'm comfortable with like that version of Rav Gigi saying, like, Hashem, please protect me. Here I am, living the way that I understand that you want me to live, right? Something like that. So I hope that this sort of these three versions of what the mezuzah is, something that actually has you like looking off the page a little bit and to your doorway, and that it impacts the way that you experience mezuzah from now on. Thanks, everybody. Great learning with you.